like wisdom traditions will talk about like this stage where you're noticing that you're not that. So I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my feelings, I'm not what I'm seeing with my eyes or what I'm hearing with my ears, because all that is being experienced or observed. Or so what is it that is experiencing all these different stimuluses, and then that takes you more and more into like awareness. But then actually at a certain stage, it's like, yeah, but you're also all of this phenomenon as well.
The container is now open. On this episode, we talk to none other than Sean Wilkinson, co founder of Circling Europe. This summer, I received some extremely profound and important teachings from Sean himself at Circling Europe's yearly festival. So we thought it was the right time to have him come on and share insight into surrendered leadership. And that's where our conversation begins. After a little preamble, Sean goes into what makes surrendered leadership so much different than these other modalities and paradigms that show up in spiritual and personal development spaces. P.S. If you aren't super clear on what surrendered leadership is in the first place, in the show notes you'll find a link to an interview we did with another Circling Europe co-founder, John Thompson, where he describes the surrendered leadership practice. The conversation you're about to hear really reconnected me with what made me fall in love with this practice in the first place. Surrendered leadership has no preconceived notions about what we're doing here and where we might go next. We learn how to check in with ourselves and let that be our guide. Easier said than done. Yeah, other modalities give us access to plenty of healing and beauty, but surrendered leadership frees us from even the expectation that we're here to heal or witness beauty. It makes surrendered leadership feel really limitless by comparison. It breaks any restrictions on the elements at play in any given time, be they physical or cosmic or spiritual or angelic or bacterial or vibes based. Before we jump into the conversation, I do want to give a shout out to our patrons. They help pay for all of the money and time and, yes, life force that goes into producing the container. If you would like to be one of those beautiful souls who chip in to support the work we do, head over to patreon.com/the container. For just $5 a month, you get access to a ton more content, including our series where we circle through the Tao Te Ching, and you get the warm glow inside knowing that you are contributing to this growing resource. Okay, so now I'm going to send you off to our interview with Sean Wilkinson of Circling Europe. P.S. You can listen to a lot of our content at 1.5 speed, and some people prefer that. The one downside is you risk participating in a culture of hurry that is separating humanity from the present moment. Sean Wilkinson, welcome to the container. This is really exciting. We were just talking, and I before hitting record, and my nervous system started to get very amped up. So I'm like coming in very hot to the recording. Yeah, thank you for showing up and sharing some insights. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, well, I just want to start by saying, hey, Jonathan, we met in the festival this year. I didn't even know you were the container guy, so we just met in a workshop, and I started playing with you a little, and yeah, I loved how receptive you were, and I was like, man, this guy he's up for going into deep waters. And then later someone's like, yeah, that's the container guy. And yeah, so good to be here. And in terms of, yeah, what I do, well, I'm full time leading these relational, meditative, interpersonal, collective awareness practices, for want of a better word. One way we like to call it is transformational connection. And that's just where like everyday connection that we're used to, humans relating, can actually, with some like different perspective and um, like with insight, can become really powerful, potent, intimate uh, gateways for many things. Like, so normal human relationships. And why I say normal, because often when people do self-development, like you go to a therapist, which is kind of in a room separate from everyone else, and or you go to a retreat where you do meditation for 10 days and don't talk to anyone. And that's quite familiar. Or you go to an intimacy workshop, but everything's like practices where you're being different to what you normally are. Whereas in these practices, there's this real emphasis on, can we be even more ourselves, but bring our presence to that? And that turns out to be one of the most potent gateways to, deep meditative states, to integrating trauma, to developing more authentic leadership, to psychedelic experience, archetypal experience. It's like unbelievable. And there's this sweet poetic like truth to that for me, that it's just in our human connections actually it's these deeper mystical healing insightful experiences are accessible.
Yeah, something that I'm reminded of by hearing you, and that I'm continuously shocked at the relational arts, is how simple and obvious the doorway was the whole time. And it just could never see it. And it's like, I spent my whole life talking to people and being in rooms with people, or even when you're alone, you're like relating in all of these millions of ways. And, that can be the door to these mystical realizations. It's it's crazy.
Yeah, and actually I think we all have had those experiences in different ways, like that, that one friend that every time we're with them we always feel alive and we can't stop talking, and there's just a synergy. In a way, with a little bit more awareness, you start to see that no, that was a life force being cultivated between you and this person. Or there's that moment you meet that girl on that night and everything seems to kind of come together and you just have this feeling of like aliveness, or a oneness, or like that moment just really stands out for you, and maybe you'll remember that for the rest of your life. So it's like, so we actually have these experiences, but there was never like, oh, sometimes human connection can be absolutely amazing, because it just kind of would happen, and then yeah, and then it's human connection can certainly be the opposite of that. Like it can be so painful and confusing and weird, and like, why is that person suddenly acting like that? Why is there suddenly distance? Why does it go well till this point? And so there's so much that can be, and often our greatest pain and trauma is relational, but often our peak moments, even like I think like a peak moment, say like winning a sports event or doing a performance that goes well, or like securing a business venture that succeeds. What do you do as soon as you have that moment? Like you want to go to your family or you want to go to your loved one, and it's that connection that brings all the aliveness.
Life force. Sean really reminds us that this connection to life force is a critical component of the surrendered leadership practice. It's a part of the discipline that opens up these like new dimensions. It's going from 2D to 3D. It's insane. For most people practicing in circles, it seems hard enough to sit there and witness what comes up, and instead of judging it, really welcoming it, noticing it, disclosing it, and listening to other people doing the same, and then building shared reality, that feels like a lot. But this is only one half, maybe even less than one half of the practice. But if we are limiting ourselves only to noticing, our present moment is devoid of that aching, fully embodied, vibrant life. And Sean insists that we open up a tremendous amount of power in the moment and in the space when we speak for, speak as, and speak through life force. I think for me, the relational arts, especially the core practice for me for years, and I got so much explosive personal growth and spiritual opening, and just like I got my feet on the path really solidly through authenticity, and that's like kind of a difficult term, but maybe let's say through pretty rigorous, difficult honesty about what was coming up in me. And by learning how to own in my language what was coming up, and through that process, teaching myself how to not cling to what I was experiencing, but just witnessing and making object of these states, and starting to get this consciousness of energy is moving through me and things are like bubbling up, and that none of that is me. And that's like, more than one sage has been yelling that at the top of their lungs, for millennia. But it's like this relational practice really allowed me to see that in a way that was so undeniable. And then on top of it, it trained me in reps. So I got like a lot of hypertrophy around making object of and disclosing that with people. And then I show up at a workshop led by Sean, and like I'll never forget this moment. I was in a dyad, and we were like in these like paired off and for the practice, and you, for whatever reason, crouched down next to my dyad, and I was doing a lot of, not to brag, pretty exquisite noticing, pretty thorough noticing. And then
Yeah.
you said, that's really good, but that's the blue belt, and we're going for the brown belt here. And it was like such a, it was such an awakening moment, and also like it gave so much permission to resistance I had felt to the practice before, where it's like sometimes it's like you're running your ship, and then you kind of hit the sand barge of like, I'm noticing a lot, but I can't get to this thing that really needs to be said. um and that process of learning how to, once we step out and make object of, to then cleanly step back in and speak that. I think you often will frame that as like life force, from what I've heard, or like, letting life force come out. So I kind of want to, this is like a long, vague sort of, um,
Yeah.
yeah, like experience that I've had through being around you. And I really want to share that with our audience, this level of the practice. And I wonder if you could kind of speak to it and, yeah, go off.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was a big discovery through practicing a lot that um, I remember one time we were uh, we'd just led a weekend, and we're in that kind of bubble of like heightened state and intimacy, and we're kind of celebrating, having a meal together. And one of my kind of team members was kind of connecting with someone in the table, and there was a lot of witnessing going on. Like, oh yeah, I'm noticing, like, and I think he was even guiding this person a little to be like, oh, look, I'm having this thought, but do you notice I can see the thought, and so I must not be the thought. And there was this kind of witnessy conversation going on. And then I was in this like encounter where it was like for a moment I was like feeling this slight anxiety, and I was noticing I was eating a little fast, and like even though I was feeling kind of good and connected, there was a subtle way I was like something was like also a little bit off, a bit like what you said before, like yeah, this is good, but there's something, if I'm really authentic, something's not quite in the groove. And as I stayed with it, it was so intense to stay with that I almost couldn't. And then suddenly something just shifted. And it was like hearing the witnessing just felt like it was like, I don't know, a bit maybe this Matrix moment where suddenly like you can like just fight the agent with one hand. It was like I could sense what was going on in the witnessing, and it was just like it was like, okay, that's very light connection compared to really being in this energy that's alive inside of me. And like there's a sense of like speaking from that or as that, which is a much more direct, it's like it's not this kind of, oh, I'm noticing that I'm here now. It's like you say things just really to the point, like, you know, tell me what you're tell me what's really there, or you're more direct. You're like, I need you to share more, or I don't know, it's hard to come up with it on the moment, but there's a directness, or like, I'm here, just a simple way of saying it. But when you're in this life force, you can say the most simple things, but it often just has such an impact because it's so like well, it's the aliveness of our being, and that aliveness is so connected to the aliveness in others. And so I had these experiences often, and John Thompson, my kind of main co-founder Circling Europe, he also um, he has a propensity for this as well. So we were often kind of getting into this, and often it was like kind of just happening. We kind of bumped into it, or sometimes we would play a little rough with each other, and that would kind of open it up. But through lots of practice, I realized you don't need that. You don't need to like hit each other hard to get kind of to open. There's actually a way we can really intimately connect on this level of life force, and there are different keys that I've discovered, and but then people also have their own unique ways as well. But there are some ways that can be pretty consistent.
Making object of, making subject of. These are the yin and yang of the practice. But this understanding opens up an entirely new issue. How do we build communities of practice where we all know that everyone else is doing that quiet, humble work of simply noticing and owning? How do we know that everybody is doing the difficult and sometimes very scary work of committing to honesty and authenticity? That realness that's developed by making object of. Sean gives us a way to think about how these two elements work together in a system we might call the practice. Rather than thinking of it as like flickering between the yin of welcoming everything and witnessing and noticing, or the life force tapping yang of like stepping in and speaking for what comes up, he reminds us that everything is grounded in a lot more than just those two components, right? Maybe, and I'm going out on a limb here, we can think of it as kind of a soil and sprout system. So good practice soil is like community norms where people are really authentic. People do a lot of noticing. People are trusting that they can really welcome and disclose. And out of that soil can sprout these moments of embodying life force. allowing it to surge into bloom. This favors flow, right? And it favors spontaneity rather than having some set conditions that we're trying to reach before moving into one or the other. It's a very surrendered leadership approach, unsurprisingly. What is surprising is to hear Sean describe it, and it feels so effortless and obvious, once you hear it. Like practicing this in a relational arts space and working to connect through that directness and speaking the exact words of what wants to come out rather than noticing. I'm having this experience where I can kind of feel myself internally I'm making object of, and I'm doing my noticing and my like owning, and then more and more I'll skip that step verbally. And then in the practice space, that's like I'm working with a lot of people who also have a lot of experience noticing, and they have a lot of experience with me, so there's a lot of trust built up that as I'm saying these things, it's like we understand that it's sort of like math problems. Like I'm not showing my work, but they know I can do this math, so they're like, okay, I trust you.
Yeah.
But then like I'm like worried that if I just do this, like just do listen to me, duality is here in my heart. It's like if I stick to this layer, then I'm gonna like atrophy these muscles of noticing and making object of, and I'm going to and like how do I onboard people into a community of practice? Like, are they gonna have to do it just noticing for the first year? It's like you just are
Right.
stay in the noticing room for a fucking year and a half or whatever. I don't know. Like, how does this work, Sean?
Well, just to give you and people listening like because bit of sense of these terms. There's actually someone that helped me with this, a guy called Olin Gullikson. He wrote a book on dynamic presencing. He's like a super academic guy, but he's an integral practitioner, and he's actually got a journal, and he's written books on cohering we space. So but it put language or a kind of map to the things that were actually happening all the time in our practice space. And that's fairly useful. Like, and so you actually mentioned it. You could say like that within the practice, you could have like 4 levels. That's fairly common. And obviously, all models are like limited, but like for this, just to help context what we're talking about. So what you started with is authenticity, and that's often like the kind of beginning of the journey. Because like if you come into a group, especially these kind of authentic relating, circling, transformation connection, surrendered leadership, what you'll notice if you've never been in a group like that is people are being really honest, like, and in ways that can be surprising. Like, someone's there and they suddenly say like, oh, I'm actually trying to please the leader right now by sharing like intelligently what I'm feeling. The truth is like I'm actually really scared, and I'm really scared of like what I feel with this person over here. And so that's just like an unusual thing to hear in a group. um, or someone shares what they're feeling and they're crying, and then someone says like, oh, I don't feel anything when you're crying. And it's like, what? You're meant to be like like there's just this radical honesty. And what this does is this already creates like a, a domain, or a life world is another way to call it. So if you're in a group where you can be real like that and keep being more and more authentic, which is not something you can do, like, because I see a difference between honesty and authenticity, because you can be honest but not authentic. So you could honestly say, oh yeah, I'm like calm right now, and that's honest. But actually, if you pay more attention, this authenticity needs, like the authenticity we're talking about needs attention. So if I pay attention, then I could be like, oh, I'm kind of calm, but I'm also kind of a little bit distant from my own body. Oh, so actually, oh, when I feel that, actually, I feel actually there's a bit of tension in my belly. Oh, something's going on in me. So now it's a bit more authentic. Like it's not just this, oh, I'm calm, honest. It's like, no, there's a deeper layer, there's something being discovered. So authenticity really needs discovery. So if you're in a group and people are really discovering what's there, it's going to create energy. It's going to create intimacy that's unusual or not your normal kind of intimacy. And actually, people can see this now that podcasters and thought leaders, they're way more authentic than they used to be like 10, 20 years ago. And you can feel an intimacy with that that's like a kind of part of this new kind of unfolding in our culture. Even politicians and things are kind of being more authentic in a way that they never used to be. That's a much slower process. But then, so then, but then there's a limitation with that. And if you lead a group just from that layer of like, let's be more and more authentic, it gets more and more like you have to kind of keep digging for more and more honest, kind of more authentic things. And it's easy to get into conflict because you're kind of sharing your projections of each other, and you've got to discern those. But for it to be real, you've got to kind of just let it out there. So there's a limit to that, and in terms of how deep you can go meditatively, there is a limit to that. And that's why people often in the end get kind of fed up with this practice of like radical honesty all the time, just like it actually becomes a kind of burden and pressure.
Mm.
But that's where we develop these capacities. And in the practices we do, this happens spontaneously, like naturally. And I wouldn't just like, oh yeah, you just practice being real, and now you're going to practice witnessing or noticing. Like we do it kind of, it happens more in a flow, but you can separate it out that this capacity to witness. And so there it's like I'm like right now noticing the sound of my voice now as I go more into witnessing. I notice that I'm holding my hands up, and as I hold them, I can start to feel more subtle energy in my hands, and I notice my feet are slightly off the floor, which makes me sense there's a little bit of nervousness. I'm kind of witnessing what's happening, and you can tell by the sound of my voice, it starts to become a bit more quieter or a little bit more monotone because it's like I'm really kind of engaging this witnessing capacity, slowing down. And that slowing down, apparently, if you kind of put an ECG on a meditator, it's actually their brain speeding up, which gives them the impression of slowing down because you're processing more information. So it just seems to be going slower. So, so this witnessing capacity is beautiful because suddenly you're not just like blurting out your authenticity, you're getting more space to kind of allow your experience to be there. And there's a sense of a, a distance, you could say, to what's arising, and a new identity that arises. Like you become more spacious, and if you're in a group like that, it can be a relief from this kind of hard hitting, like let's just be real, man. And it's becomes witness, yeah, and that again, I think affords like a deeper meditative awareness, and you also will start to notice more subtle parts of you, more subtle feelings, more subtle contexts start to be revealed of like what's really going on in the group, what the collective feels like. So this witnessing is like a majorly important like capacity we have, but then it has its limitation, and this is what you were pointing to. Like if you often when you stay in a witnessing kind of, you're disidentifying, it can become thin in a way of like it's a constant like oh, I'm noticing that I want to notice what I'm noticing, and it gets a bit regressive, like, oh, and it's also like you, it almost feels like it can get a little, I don't know if forced is the right word, but like you don't get a straightforward answer to anything. It's always like, oh, I'm curious. Do you want, like, I'm curious, are you curious? Or
Mm. Yeah,
or
there's it's mealy mouthed. Yeah, there's like a way sometimes it's like it sounds like it's not very trustworthy in some way. Like it's so wordy and sort of like yeah, it's so owned and yet invulnerable in a way because it's
yeah.
distant or yeah.
And it's also like if you really check in with someone as well, I often do this when I'm circling someone because they'll say like, oh yeah, I'm noticing that I'm like a little bit spaced out. And then if I check in with them, it's like, oh, so is there a part of you that's like watching your this sense of spaced outness, or are you actually spaced out? And then it's like, oh yeah, I'm actually spaced out. So the formulation, it kind of helps to create this witnessing. So it's beautiful to learn these ways of noticing, and I'm curious, and like I'm wondering what's, because you take more ownership of your language, you create more boundaries between your experience and the other person's experience, which is super important to intimacy. And at a certain point, it's like it's gonna start getting a bit annoying, you could say, or it's gonna start feeling like there's a kind of limit to this, and you're kind of bumping up against something, and you're not quite sure what it is, or and then you actually start to get this like sense of inauthenticity of like, is this really how I talk, or I'm at my family Christmas dinner, and I'm like, I'm noticing that I want some turkey right now. And everyone's like, huh? Like what you just grab some turkey, you idiot. Like it's yes, so that's the limitations of that life. But when I say these things, I think this witnessing is super important. And what I'd also say to one of your questions is I wouldn't abandon it at all. And sometimes you're if you're like, yeah, part of you wants to go deeper into life force, you could say, or something more direct, but something in you's like, oh, I'm not sure if it's ready, or I would really take that seriously if there's a part of you that's not sure, because because the witnessing is such a good, like, grounding, spacious kind of presence and intimacy. So sometimes that's just what's called for. And this is where, like, yeah, the analogy of the brown belt and the black belt, and like it's a playful way just to say that, like, I often think like more advanced practitioner is is willing to kind of break the rules, you could say, or do things slightly different to what you do as you're learning them, but they're also willing to do the simple things and go back to the simple things
Hmm.
and just do the basics really well, or not always pushing to new frontiers. It's like there's a groundedness to play, along the whole continuum.
Yeah, the word that comes up for me is discernment, that which is such a beautiful uh, level of like spiritual attuning to a practice is this knowing the tools enough to be deploying them not in a rush or not to impress with like, oh, I can really do some great, we can get crazy and people will start popping and there'll be tears and rage. And you can also, yeah, you can always notice. I think that's for me, something that I've done a lot in my life since learning that tool is like, if I get really scared of disconnection or if I get really enraged, or I'm like I'm in a state that is concerning to some degree, I will like mantra like tell myself that you can just notice, that's enough. right now, as you can just notice, and that can be your job right now. And so I like thinking about that in a practice setting
Yeah.
where um we can get such strong amplitude with other tools that they can be very, like, I guess, seductive for that reason. I noticed,
Yeah.
like, honesty has that too. Like you were talking about with the limitations to authenticity. I've noticed that that will often a lot of AR experiences often feel um like really sort of um wanting to induce this drug-like state of edginess that
Yeah.
has so much heat and, like, whoa, that person just said they want to fuck this other person, or that they think they're boring or lying, or yeah, it's like that heat is so intoxicating and yeah. um and yet witnessing kind of settles us back, but is secretly very, it's a totally different kind of edge, but it's very like um yeah, it's so quiet, and there's something very monkish about it.
Yeah.
It's sweet. Something we often do in spiritual circles, I think, especially those of us who you might call seekers, is we go for the most extreme ends, and we try to stay there all the time. I know when I first learned about non-duality, it's like I tried to get there, and I was like putting this pressure on myself to be there at all times. Or if I'm discovering how to detach, I might think that's something I need to be doing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The result? That's typically pretty destructive. One, it's not even really that attainable, especially not when you just, read about this thing on Wikipedia. To stay in a non dual state means you can just write off any kind of social life. No more going to the grocery store. No more tracking macros and calories. It's a lot to ask of someone locked in non dual consciousness to even reply to a simple text message. Detachment is, like, just as debilitating. Wisdom traditions almost always build really powerful and difficult containers to protect these glimpses we get into more ultimate views of reality, right? That allows us to encounter the great truths, but then be able to return to our everyday life, now greatly enriched with this more profound understanding, but in a way where the macrocosmic view and microcosmic view work together and help each other rather than compete. As above, so below, yes. But we don't want to just lock ourselves in the above and say goodbye to the below. That's where a lot of the good stuff happens. So Sean talks about how we can move through these different frames to fully appreciate the reality around us. And he does that using these two modes in surrendered leadership, the yin witness and the yang embodying life force. Once we really get in the back and forth respiration of this, we see it more like the Nataraja, the Shiva dance of creation and destruction, which also reminds us just how sacred this is. But of course, it's also very profane. That's kind of the head trip of the whole thing, right? This act, this sacred dance, is ultimately one of service. It's in service of speaking for life force, or it's in service of building connection. It's in service to this great mysterious wave that we're all riding on. A wave that we're both a part of and in relationship to.
Yeah. I think even there's like wisdom traditions will talk about like the stage where you're kind of noticing that you're not that. So I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my feelings, I'm not what I'm seeing with my eyes or what I'm hearing with my ears, because all that is being experienced or observed. So what is it that is experiencing all these different stimuluses, and then that takes you more and more into like this kind of space or awareness. And but then actually at a certain stage it's like, yeah, but you're also all of this phenomenon as well.
Right.
Like, and so that's like coming back in, and like, because you're both not it, and that is like, that's what's here, and you're all of what's here. So it's like, yeah, it's like coming back in and inhabiting. And this is where the next kind of stage I would say is like the life force or aliveness. So like aliveness has been an intuition for us like right from the beginning, and it's aliveness that we seek in the like authenticity. It's like, that's why you saying in authentic relating, there can almost be like a hunting in the end, because you need more and more refined levels of what's edgy. But like, but that can be a frustrating game, and it's costly as well, because if you're looking more and more for the edges, the chances of you crossing boundaries and or yeah, being unskillful is very high. You like, and it's a beautiful art. Like it's I still get so touched, like if I'm leading a big, especially with beginners, like they off balance me more than anyone, because they can just say the most like, whoa, where did that come from? And like, it's super like honest, even if it's unowned or something. It's like so good to get that shock. and and so in this life force level, the way I like to describe it's like, from this witnessing, if you can stay in that awareness, but it's like really now re-entering your experience, really in your body, the embodied being you are, and and that sense of you-ness or uniqueness of who you are, like really claiming that back. So you're not just like disidentifying, but you're not coming back in and being like real again, just like, oh yeah, this is boom, I'm angry with you, or I'm, but it's like, and we can do it right now. It's like, as you feel the sensations in your body, it's like every little sensation is a drop of life force. It's like the essence of being. It's like alive. It's got a message. It's got deep information. It's making you up as you are right now. And so it's like really coming back into that, like not just witnessing it from the space, but like inhabiting it. So embodiment becomes super important. And you can be embodied with witnessing. That's a false thing to say. But when you can notice someone who's dancing from witnessing, because it's got that same feel, but it's also elegant, but it's yeah, it's more slow and like, but like someone who's in life force can be unbelievably kind of boom, but it still has that presence. It's not just kind of wacky, like being real kind of. It's a, but it's yeah. So and then it's this sense of being your life force. Because when I'm honest, I'm still a little bit kind of just like, oh, this is what's here. I'm not speaking as I am what's here. So just a simple example, like if I say like, oh, yeah, I'm angry with you when you say that, or you can witness it's like, oh, I'm noticing I'm angry. But then it could even be like, I don't think you would say it like this, but this is a good way to illustrate it. Like, I am anger. And it's like, and that's where someone could also be like, oh, um, someone could come in being real, like, oh, I want to feel more connection. Like, I just feel disconnected. And then you could witnessing being like, oh, I notice I have a longing to feel closer or more intimacy. You can feel that space. But then like from that life force, from that longing, it's like, oh, I am intimacy with you right now. Like, I had a little bit of noticing in it, but yeah, but it's I am here, or or it's even more, and it can, to get out of the witnessing, it's also just bringing in the human. It's like, okay, I want you right now, or I need to come closer. It's like, what's the longing saying? And and longing is also an important gate. Like if you can get in touch with your desire, longing, and speak from that, like it's gonna it's gonna shake up the witnessy, spacey energy, the slow, like, you're going to actually start to feel like more real, but you're going to get increased sense of the witness, but you're going to suddenly feel this. Another word people call for this is like soul or essence. It's like somehow something that just feels deeply you comes forward, and it's like the liveness as you speak from it increases. Whereas when you speak from the witness, your sense of space increases. And in the real, like as you start to be real, you see more layers of what you can be honest about. But as you speak from life force, you get more and more of this energy. It's almost kind of tantric then. It's like you suddenly, like, this aliveness is coming through you. But
Yeah,
there's,
it's
yeah,
almost like there's this way that if you move back, you do this like yin move of witnessing or yang move of embodiment, you're allowing your, I don't, it's hard to use a word that doesn't carry a lot of baggage, because I want to say like Atman or higher self or something, or like God self, but there's this part of you that isn't just a brain that has been trained. There's a part of you that gets to like actually step back or step forward, and in both of those I'm seeing there's like choicefulness. There's this, it's like breaking through the archon matrix and being like, okay, I'm gonna make a fucking choice here, and we're gonna move back when we might not have otherwise moved back, or we're gonna move in when we might not have otherwise done it. And like there's something about that choice that starts to crack when you feel this deepest part of you making a choice. It like cracks reality in a way. It you can start to see light, and it's really, things happen really fast. Yeah.
yeah. And this is, it's such a, in one way, it's weird to describe because it's like, okay, if I start to talk from life force and I start to embody and inhabit my life force, the intelligence of it is, it's so hard to describe. I think the best way to describe it is like, you take a psychedelic, even if you haven't done psychedelics, like maybe smoke marijuana, which is a kind of psychedelic anyway, or drunk alcohol. And like in that state you get into, it's like suddenly you can say things, and things are suddenly easy that weren't easy, or you know you start listening to music and it's kind of divine almost. It's like so good to listen to it, or suddenly you're looking at like a leaf and you're like, oh my word, like this is such a beautiful thing. And it's like what's happened there is like the state you've gone into, the kind of awareness and embodiment you're experiencing, the kind of drug has induced, if it creates a new stimulus, and not just externally but internally. So you suddenly being able to read things inside of you that, or experience things inside of you that you couldn't in a different frequency. And so as you open to life force, it's unbelievable, this information you get. And it's like, just this energy in my belly that at first feels like nervousness, and then suddenly I'm like being this nervousness, and it's actually desire, and the desire is like thick and electric, and it like starts coming up my body, and it's like, whoa. And then, but then as I like allow it and speak from it, it's just so, it's like that thing, when you just sometimes just know what to say, or you're around someone that just seems to nail it continually. Like, how do they just like say the thing? And it's like suddenly you feel like that. It's like this energy's, by being in contact with it and being almost like rather than you kind of witnessing where you're still kind of, the operator is still kind of back here, you're suddenly more the servant to the what's inside of you. You're like you're trying to serve and be in alignment with it and let it take you. And it keeps revealing, and like you can say things that you don't normally say. You can see things in others, and it takes you on this rich journey. And rich is the right word, because everything becomes richer, and things that like you wouldn't normally, what, like trauma work, or like your deeper kind of survival patterns, they start becoming obvious, and they start like you can, and in others you can see that kind of dancing in a way that you wouldn't normally have access to. It's like you're no longer kind of looking down to try and discover it, or you're trying to embody it somehow, like while witnessing it. It's like you're almost underneath it, and it's like there for you, and it's like, yeah, it's obvious how to unfold with it.
Mm.
And so that's the cool part, or like that's the opportunity, that's a new awareness. And there's definitely new dangers, vulnerabilities that we'll definitely get onto. Like, let's just premise that now, because it's, yeah, this is comes with a, like, yeah, be careful, kind of, yeah, be cautious in this domain, because it's really deep.
Beware. It's a word that's meant to push us away, but don't we all feel a stir of desire when we hear it? That's because adventure always lives beyond that line our elders draw and say, past this point, there's no more safety guaranteed. Because ultimately, we aren't here to be safe, at least not all the time. We are here for something more. Safety is a beautiful thing, but it is far from the only thing that's important. In a way, us wanting to go beyond what we know to be safe is itself the heart of the call to adventure, and the call to adventure permeates the practice. Sean understands this very, very well. And so he shares the ways we can stay smart and survive in the depths. He does this in part by borrowing from archetypal stories. And he also gives us notes on how we negotiate risk, trust, and humility as we're bringing forth life force. In other words, just because life isn't about staying safe, it doesn't mean we eschew safety at all times. In fact, we make sure we have as much of it as possible, right? The knight chasing the Holy Grail wears armor and brings a sword. So let's learn about the armor and sword we can use as we work to conjure up life force in surrendered leadership spaces. Something that really draws me into the process you're describing is that a lot of wisdom traditions will frame these processes as like letting go, or mystical. It'll be like letting go into, and like getting into samadhi that way, or going towards mystical union or something. But the way you describe it, and I think the way that I felt, why I think I felt so aligned with the practice, is that it feels much more like a call to adventure. It feels much more like um a hero's journey, that which is, I realize, is, comes with its own, that's has its own baggage, but it really does feel like a hero's journey, a call to, like, yeah, to this path that there's going to be, every time you level up in these skills, it's like the dragon gets more difficult too, and everything is harder, but you are so much more powerful. And it's like, it's there's so much excitement, and it's like it's following the rabbit, the white rabbit. It's like so inspiring, and it starts to touch this part of me that I think a lot of spiritual traditions nowadays don't. At least for me, they it it like the red-blooded part of me gets really like turned on to that vision of spiritual practice as this adventure, this great adventure.
Yeah. It makes me think of the Matrix when you say that, because I like the like first of all, you're like you come out of the Matrix and you're being real. It's like, oh yeah, everything's kind of is the program, and now we're outside the program. But it's like, yeah, that's more real. And they even say it like we're in the real world. And you could say it's a metaphor for like you see mind, you see like how thoughts and conditioned ideas and culture like it indoctrinates you in a way if you don't wake up to it. But then you escape the matrix, and then actually there's, if you look closely, hang on a second, Zion's pretty controlled as well and kind of runs on the machines. And oh shit, the Oracle is actually a program. Like, oh, things aren't quite as cozy as I thought they were going to be as I got more real. So as you get more honest, the metaphor is like, yeah, great, you've been more honest. But if you're more honest, you're going to start to see really clearly things that are going to have a big impact on you. Like, what if you've been like, and this is very common, say you've been like holding back your sadness or your loneliness, and you didn't realize. So you start getting in contact with loneliness and sadness, and suddenly it takes you really deep, and you don't know if it's like where it's going to end. I remember like I was a tennis coach at the time, going on this kind of deepening into my emotions and through this being more real. And like I was working with these kind of kids that I work with regularly. It was a kind of very serious players, so we would work intensely. And I'm like almost crying on the court. I'm like, my eyes are welling up. And there's parents on the balcony watching the sessions. I'm like with these kids, like trying to like, motivate them. And like, I love teaching with lots of metaphors and playfulness, but I'm like, if I'm like being authentic here and that's what I'm committed to, I'm ready to burst out in tears. I'm feeling so alone and so uh, uncomfortable actually in this position being watched, and all these pressures of a tennis coach that normally I just kind of hold in my persona and just like, but I'm being more real. So I'm actually real sad. Like, who's helping me? Like all these feelings come up. One time, even a kid said to me, who was the most, you could say, distracted kid of the group, just suddenly one time said, Sean, are you gonna cry? But it was amazing because I felt actually quite seen, and that helped regulate me. So I was like, oh no, just it's all right. Let's keep playing. But yeah, so as you become more real, you're gonna open up, and you're also gonna see things like you've been kind of making agreements or telling people things about you that you actually find out aren't real as they could be. And now you've got to kind of address that. That is going to change your whole life in slowly but surely. You're going to realize a lot of the ways you've been acting aren't really in alignment with your more
Mm.
real. But then you take this next stage into witnessing, or and I mean it happens kind of non-linear, but the more you witness, again, you're going to get more subtle. You're going to start to see more space. You're going to start to question the nature of reality. Is suddenly going to become a question for you. Now that is destabilizing. Like our nervous system, like the best description of this, like our nervous system's kind of geared towards giving us orientation, and like if we start messing with the foundations of like how we orient reality, questioning reality itself, questioning our identity, questioning our destiny. It's like that's gonna like really impact our being, and it's gonna bring up even more of the kind of unconscious parts of us that we haven't. So it comes at a kind of, yeah, and that's got Matrix 2. But then in Matrix 3, it's like Neo starts to see light, he doesn't just, and the witnessing's like the green code. So you could suddenly start to see the green code. It's like, oh, I can witness. But then Neo starts seeing the white code. So it's like, what is that? Like that's like underneath the green code. That's even more powerful. And so that's the life force. Like he's starting to see through, and he's even starting to, because he's even seeing through, like you think you're being more real, but you're actually trapped in this kind of witnessy, and there's all sorts of assumptions and worldviews and stuff that are actually embedded in this spiritual practice of witnessing. And so if you start to see through
Right.
that, which is what Neo does, he sees through the oracle, he sees through the architect, sees through Morpheus's true believer kind of, and that's why he gets access to this kind of more foundational kind of layer of reality, you could say, this life force, this light that's
Mhm.
actually infusing everything. And that's how I see the life force. But again, and we'll probably get to this, like there's new vulnerabilities with the, the life force that, yeah, it's important to acknowledge.
Yeah, you've mentioned that twice now, and it makes me feel like there are like very specific reasons why you've mentioned that twice.
Yeah, yeah, well, I learned from experience. Likes to give you a whack when you're kind of off a target. Yeah, and it was some good challenges, and we had to learn a lot to kind of ground that kind of, yeah, new kind of opening that came through our practice. And it was there from the beginning in lots of ways. Like you said, it's non-linear, but it was really helpful to be able to distinguish and start to see the strengths and limitations of these potentials.
The like movement into embodying life force, it's like one of the ways one of the ways I experience it being riskier is that you start to make impact. That's almost like the new thing you that comes on the table, really. And one way of looking at it is witnessing you really reduce impact so much. It's amazing how much, because you can be very honest, but if it's really owned and noticed, it's like hard to take offense to someone noticing, even if they're like, I notice as you say this, I'm having waves of boredom come up. It's like, wow, thank you. It's very forgivable and like almost overly earnest, and then um stepping in and making subject of, all of a sudden you're making impact again. And like I was noticing in some of the surrendered leadership circles, or yeah, activities at the festival, the cultural difference with a bunch of Europeans and a very high level of practice in, per person in those rooms. It was so much more freedom around something like touch, which in America, touch is extremely difficult to navigate, especially in like public facing events. It's just very difficult. That's a frame. I mean, maybe it's not as difficult as, but in my mind at least, it seems fucking phenomenally difficult. And um navigating it often becomes a little legalistic, like, well, if you're gonna touch, please ask first and get verbal consent and all that stuff. I realize why we have it, and I don't want to like minimize the reasons people request that or want that. That's not what I'm talking about. It's more like I was just, I became aware, like, man, the mental landscape, I like kind of the unquestioned contours of my mental landscape are that's so kind of confronting to my American prudishness or something. And then really feeling into that and being like, yeah, like as if I step in more fully to life force, I'm much more drawn to like touch people on the shoulder, even something as simple as that, that in many spaces that I experience in, that is not normal behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, so impact. I don't know. That feels like aligned kind of with the warnings that you're giving.
Yeah, well, the thing I would say, the the I know what you mean about the witnessing. It's like you're it's almost like you're creating such a neat package of what it is you're expressing that it's like, yeah, it's like I don't know, cleanly kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Well, there's a good word for it, but there but I would also say actually it does have a lot of impact because it's like in a room, especially if you're a leader or you're in a room full of people and you start witnessing your experience and sharing that, you're actually going to probably transmit witnessing consciousness to the room, and people will actually start to feel like a bit like, and if they're not used to it, they'll probably be angry with you or something because they're like heightened state. But it's but you're right that there's some way that it can sometimes, I mean, it can actually help people really open emotionally in amazing ways. But it is again a little bit like I'm over here, you're over there, and you'll experience your sadness over there, and I'll witness it from over here. There's something in the life force where it can suddenly be like, you know, a word from you could open me to a new level of feeling, and then like whatever I say back, or a movement or a noise. You know, I've seen with the life force amazing things, like these random things, like someone kind of you ask them a question, maybe from the witnessing, and they just kind of like hiss, or they like they move a certain way, and it just like you don't know why, but it kind of totally opens you, and you're like, whoa, and puts you in this new. So there's different messages and transmissions going on this level, and but that's where the danger comes in, because you've got to be careful that, like, one of the things that can really open you to life force is this trust. It's like this self-trust, or trust in experience. It's like I'm trusting this energy in me, and it's telling me to say to you, um like be more direct, like it. Whereas if I got that energy and that's the expression it came, I'd be more like, oh, I'm noticing, I'm like wanting to have something clearer when you're sharing with me, and some kind of packaging it. And suddenly there's this more direct. Well, one thing you've got to be super humble about is, in one way, if you speak directly from the energy, and sometimes you even get particular words, and if you kind of change the word to kind of make it sound a bit nicer or more comfortable, you don't get the life force opening. So suddenly you realize that you have to actually really be faithful. But then you can be self-justificatorily, like inappropriately direct and unowned, and you can start to self-justify how you're showing up, and that's a real danger, especially if you're a leader. um, and so on the one side, it's like there's this new opportunity if you dare to be more direct, dare to speak more from your experience, more follow your embodiment. But on the other side, it's this humbleness, because if you justify how you're showing up based on life, or this deep sounding kind of, you could justify things that are actually not okay, or there'll be ways you're unconscious that you don't realize, and so that's one thing you've got to be really mindful of. And that's why I would say, if in doubt, I would go into witness. I wouldn't, like, in the past, I might have been in, because it was so rich, I might take the risk. But if my intuition's like, hang on a second, because, like, to give you an example, and I always find this, um, that like women tend to get the life force more easily, just generally. When it opens, they tend to, it just, it surprises me sometimes because it took me so long to practice into this energy and to understand it, and then I'm with someone who's just new to practice, and I go into that kind of energy, and I can see they just totally get it, and it's like, especially women, whereas guys can more often be like, what's going on here? And I think there is often a more natural, embodied, earthy, yeah, connection. Guys tend to have more struggles with identifying with their thought, thinking, and mind, and that's usually more of a struggle for men. But even though everyone is kind of in that dance. But to give you an example of how it can unfold, like one time I was with my partner and we're like with my wife, and I'm like wanting to play, and then I realized that I'm like a bit in a witnessy way with her. So I like come into my body more fully, and I'm like I show it with her, and I think I say something like, I want all of you. And why I wouldn't say that if I was in witnessing is because it's like, you could say I'm like saying, well, isn't she all here already? Like it's a subtle criticism in there, you could say, and there's an expectation. But in the energy, it was like, that's so, yeah, I want all of you. And there was vulnerability in it, but there was also like a daring to come forward. And then, and this is way like understanding like the like the energy is really important, because she turns around and says, like, I can see that she gets it. There's a moment where she might just contract and be like, oh, what was I not, like, you're wanting something from me? But she kind of shows up, and then she says, I hate you. And it was like, boom. And it really hit me. And it was like, and very surprising for her character to say that. But actually, if I stayed present and with the life force lit up from that expression, because it's not really about the words, it's like the expression. I mean, it's, you can't totally discount the words, so there's something to that message, but it was like there was, and then that brought up way more vulnerability in me being with her, because I felt quite powerful before in this, like, I want all of you, because then I'm suddenly like, I don't know if I can handle all of you. It's like, but it was also kind of, I got this sense of her kind of warning of like, this is sacred ground in me. So are you ready? Like, if you're going to come in here, like, with them, I'm the closest person to her, and like, it was almost like I got a sense of reverence for her, like in that expression actually, where if I was still a little bit more in witnessing, or like, or I didn't understand these deeper energies, I might need to like, oh, when you say you hate me, I notice, I feel like, and then we'll explore that, and that's okay. That could be rich actually. But compared to like getting this sense of reverence for her, like showing up and letting me know, like, if you're going to show up here, like, I need to trust you even more fully. Like, and then in that, actually, this is the amazing thing of like, I could actually feel where I don't know if I can trust myself in this area. But if you
Mm.
switch from that, it's like, oh, yeah, I don't know where to go here. I don't know if I can fully trust myself to be here, and I still want to. It's like you suddenly get these paradoxical truths, and it'd be so kind of easy to get triggered into the normal response of like, a woman saying she can't trust you. You're suddenly like, yeah, well, yeah, I respect your boundaries, and but the aliveness is gone. And but so if you go to the truth of the life force, it's like, yeah, I don't know if I can stay with you through thick and thin. I don't know, but I want to give it a try. And that's something we explored in that workshop we were playing in, of like, if you start to go to this life force, it's like you start to talk like these kind of movie moments where it's like, you say this thing, and it's got a longing and it's got a fear, and then the other person comes in and they actually like acknowledge like that, yeah, they're also scared, but they want this, and then you just, dance slowly but surely into this deeper intimacy and reality of human connection. Yeah, and
Um,
that's just to say that's one way to play in this domain. There are also, I think the performers that we're enthralled by, if we went to a dance or a ballet or like a sports performance and we came out being like that person was like totally in the zone. I think what we're actually sensing is they were totally allowing their life force to guide them, which, like, imagine you're on a big performance on a big stage, letting go to follow the inner life force rather than like follow what it is you've learned and rehearsed and like just follow that built-in program you've developed in yourself to do it at a very high level, which is amazing. It's not, when I say program, we're talking about the most advanced human program ever to like perform an unbelievably world-class action. But if someone can let go of that and let their life force and trust that's in them and the form will take care of itself, that's the kind of performance we'll pay a lot of money to be part of because we'll get the transmission of that.
mm.
But that performer has to be super vulnerable, because if you dare to like let go and follow the life force, you might just lose it. You might just like have nothing. It's a whole new level of vulnerability.
I notice as I'm listening to you, I'm like trying to be like, oh yeah, well I have this podcast. How do I do that fully in life force? Learning techniques to navigate the depths is essential for developing our individual practice. But I think it's always worth reminding ourselves that surrendered leadership happens between people. There at least has to be two or three of us for that life force to be among us, to paraphrase a very famous public speaker. Sean obviously has extensive experience with this. He co founded Circling Europe, which is by far the biggest surrendered leadership community in the world. It runs an immense calendar of events, workshops, and trainings. To find out more about those offers, which are really spectacular, go to circlingeurope.com. Link in show notes. Now, the question that we're going to move into is, how do we orient communities to this mixture, this movement, this flow between making object of and making subject of witnessing and of embodying? And if this terrain really is as dangerous as we just spoke about, then how do we hold our communities as we all move into these depths? More importantly, how do we hold our communities in surrender and still keep everybody from getting just so blown out that they end up, lying face down in the carpet and crying instead of noticing what it's like to be them right now? Sean's answers lead to even bigger horizons than I was thinking we were going to go. He ends up asking the ultimate question. Life force feels really deep down into the core of reality, but there's actually something even below that, which is the mystery of source. Where does it all come from anyway? And if we really try to answer that, where does it take us? Ultimately, should our communities be oriented towards relation to source rather than being focused on the heat of edgy honesty or the slow meditative witnessing or the empowering, exciting thrills of life force? Maybe it should be pointed to something more ultimate still, Lao Tzu said that the 10,000 things come from the three things, which come from the two things, which come from the one thing, which comes from that great big zero that gave birth to all of us. Maybe instead of focusing on the excitement of any one of the many 10,000 things, we need to be focused on the zero. If we are trying to move our practice more into this making subject of and speaking, allowing life force to speak through us, and also maybe like cultivating the ability to speak for life force too, I feel like there's maybe two different moves there depending on the signal you're getting. Like, how do we really bring that into a community of practice? So like, um it's in my experience, like the way we practice in my community, it often is people in a sitting in a circle and disclosing and working to go slow and to really welcome everything, these like basics of the practice, that are really really powerful and often become, they it ends up in many places like there's tons of anger and laughter and tears and like deep processing of things in that, but and a lot of presencing, like a real bias towards the present moment. And that is, I from what I understand, that's what a lot of this practice looks like around, at least in the US. And like, how do we start, especially if we're in public events, but I guess also in private ones where everyone has some experience, like how do we start adding these new layers in and exploring these realms?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, which is like the reason why when we do surrendered leadership, the way we often do it, we can often be said to be like we're not creating enough structure, and you need to be, needs there needs to be more like agreements and the, but the thing that often doesn't get seen in that, like so if someone, like you said around touch, like if a leader decides to have this kind of like, which is fairly typical workshop conversation, or like, okay, we're going to go into this area now, and like I want everyone to put their hands up if they agree that, if someone says they need a boundary or confidentiality, that you're so, and like you said, there's a wisdom to that. Like human boundaries are so important. Like I've done so much on that area. It's so delicate. It needs super clean aware and developed awareness to do that well. And a lot of the time that isn't doing it well, because actually what you're also doing there is taking responsibility for what people are experiencing or potentially could experience, and taking responsibility for how they should navigate that. And then that's already closing down a lot of the kind of non-linear like potential of a group. It's like you're creating a kind of, it's in a way you're simplifying the complexity that's actually still there. So you're preparing, your practice becomes about preparing people for a less complex context than life is. And so that's one thing. And I think you can lead surrender leadership really well with, setting a clear vision at the beginning, and there's something to this trusting human, and that's what I think comes at the core of it, is trusting a group can show up together and handle these complex things. We do training around it, and that's important, but if there's that sense of trust, like we've done a lot in America, there's plenty of touch going on, like in those environments, but it's understandable why it's cautious, because it's a very litigious, I think that's the right word, culture. and that's got its strengths. Like you can be empowered, you can make sure you're fairly treated, but at the other side of it, it's like any opportunity to like, you know, take someone to court because people get scared then to show up, and so there's that danger. But I don't think you need like, this is what I've learned through practice. So you don't need to like take huge risks and like set a like really crazy context where no one says anything and it's just a free for all. That's not high level leadership for me. But it's being mindful of like the kind of context you're setting. So that's one thing, and that's why surrendered leadership, because it's a non-linear process. Like it's an emergent process. Like you're not saying like, oh, this is what we're exploring here. You're like opening up to like what's really here between you, and following that is going to open up life force like a lot. Like, and you're going to just keep bumping up against it. But then the practices that I think really work as well, that can go alongside that, which I really would recommend to help navigate these issues of like, you know, boundaries. And um, I like this frame of like, never let the transmission. I got this from someone in one of our trainings. Never let the transmission trump the human.
Mm.
So if you're ever in the life force and you're like, oh no, but this is what this wants to say. But if you really just give yourself a little moment to be like, yeah, but there's this human in front of me. Like when I acknowledge this human in front of me, like does it still want to come through like this? And often that will transform it if you're just getting a bit into that kind of like righteous mode of like, I've got to follow this. And then actually you're getting attached to an outcome. And that's usually where the unconsciousness comes in. So
Mm.
it's and so some cool practices could be just like we did in dyads, where you're like noticing the witnessing, maybe even doing a bit of witnessing, and then like coming right into the immediate aliveness and seeing like this pointer. Can you speak as your experience? So if you feel like a grumbling in your belly, or like I feel something in my um, solar plexus now, and I could be like, I could have this thing of, oh yeah, I'm noticing this tightness, and I'm wanting to like move away from it. And it's instead of that, it's like take time to really inhabit that feeling, and you might just start to like, my body wants to kind of come here, and you'll notice that the energy kind of moves into your body more. Or you could even be like, okay, so what is this feeling actually saying? It's like, I'm really hurt. And so it's like, oh, no, I didn't know that was going to come, but it's like, oh, I'm hurt. And then that seems true. Like there's some way deep inside me, I'm hurt.
Mm.
Whereas when I'm like in this, and I can just practice like just being more direct that way, like, and rather than like, oh, I notice there's a voice saying that I'm hurt. It's like, no, I'm hurt. Like say it. Like take fully embody it. Um, and so that those kind of practices is really good to actually, sometimes just do pair practice, or practice with someone that you really trust, where you can do that way, where you're not in the group. And then whenever in doubt, come back to witnessing.
Mm.
Oh, I notice now I'm feeling like that was edgy for me, and like I'm not sure like what's it like for you right now. And that's amazing, because then you can like map out the little bit of territory you just touched, because it's going to have so much there. And that that way you can really honor each other's boundary. Because even if you have an amazing, sometimes you can have this kind of archetypal masculine feminine unfolding hero's journey, heroine, like monsters and demons and Jesus, and it's like primal. But then if in the beginning like one of you just like actually really judged the other one, or like or kind of like, and I've experienced this personally, 3 months later the thing you're remembering is not the Jesus primal moment, you're remembering the painful way you were like treated by someone, but to open the life force.
Mm.
And just having personal experiences where I've felt that just really helps me stay connected to like the human, like, and coming back to like, okay, if at all I feel like I'm pushing this, or I have to take everyone into, as soon as see I'm there, it's like, no, come back to the human. Like, there's no rush for us to get anywhere, and as amazing as the life force is, like, it's always here anyway. There's no rush, or like, we can be really grounded here as well.
Mm.
And there are other pointers as well, but yeah, is there anything you wanted to?
Yeah, the no rush part really there at the end really spoke to something I've been dealing with a lot lately, or like working through and processing, and something actually we'll have episodes coming up in the future around this, around working with pressure that we put on ourselves. And I think one of the ways I often put pressure on myself is like, especially in practice spaces, is like to show up as much as I can and to fucking go as hard as I can and to get as, get the full scoop. Um and that, like, I'm really appreciating this sort of tempered, like, elder wisdom you're bringing of like, um that, like, for what? Like, there is no end. It's like an inexhaustible well of life force. It's always here with us, and like, why strain yourself and like potentially hurt yourself or others?
Yeah,
And like, just dance with it and play with it and learn it at a pace that doesn't risk that, or yeah, or like, I guess, risk it, and then that's the dharma, or the that's what you're living out at that point. I don't know.
and I mean, if you're playing with someone that you deeply trust, I mean, yeah, like your partner, like, imagine you two, it's like, it can get edgy, and if you both know what, like, if you start to feel comfortable in this area, like, you know, your partner could be like to you, like, I want to scratch your eyes out, like, when you talk to me like that, and like, but and and you could even be, pretty physical with each other, and like, but if you feel, if you're on the right edge, it's like it feels totally in tune. But it doesn't need to be that as well. Like, life force, it can be just very calm, and like, actually, um developmental trauma training I've done to help support this work, which is also super important because you'll touch this area. It gave me such a good transmission, the NUM kind of neuroaffective relational model, like integrating deep anger, and you can talk as calmly as I am now and get actually a way deeper anger than if you did a load of wrestling and hitting pillows and screaming and shouting. Like, often that's actually, you're staying on the level of the real, and it's not going that deep,
Mm,
actually. Like, there's a lot deeper you can go, at least, and it's better than like being suppressed and like, yeah, still in the matrix, but it's not gonna it's not gonna really integrate deep anger. And actually, you can get the life force anger really coming from your core, very calm, if you're in the right kind of transmission and intimacy. Like, that's really possible. But it's understanding these, yeah, deeper territories to do that. And I wonder, like, because we are near time, but there is one more level that is actually the most essential for grounding the life force, and that's often called like source, or like the ground being, or like, and that's where you get into the mystical traditions and the non-dual. Like, it's like, what is the source of where this life force comes from? Like, what is the being? And this is even like the source that even the witness comes from. And that's where I feel like, you know, if I start to feel a bit edgy and like, and I can enjoy being there. It's like you're a leader, and people find that exciting if you're a bit edgy, or and it can be powerful. So it can be easy, but as soon as I start to feel like I'm getting seduced and a little high on that, I just start praying,
Mm.
and it's actually come from like I've actually been going to church the last 4 or 5 years, and slowly but surely I realized that I wasn't just going there as this kind of integral, circling guy that can like translate everything everyone's saying into non-dual terms so then I can get something from it. It was like, no, I was being shown that this is a commitment to putting God or the source or like the ground as the central authority, central guidance of your life. So like actually even the life force should be secondary to that, and
Mm.
even like being real and witnessing what's here. It's like, no, there's like the ground. Like if you're really oriented, that is what you're oriented to and from, and that's what you should be speaking to and from, and the life force is even serving that. And that often brings me into humility, because I'm still like as human as I've ever been. Like even though I've done all these practices and had all these kind of psychedelic and archetypal experiences, I'm still like vulnerable around if I really hear God or not, or like if I really know these depths or not, or like still so much more I don't know than I do know. It's like if I really humbly turn to God, I'm like, I'm not this kind of powerful life force leader that can open up like crazy energies. It's like, no, I'm this like small human being that's like in this vast intelligence and this mystery of being, and and that's what I'm grounded in. And that is such a beautiful way to like context to come from when you're like exploring life force.
Mm.
And I've seen communities that really kind of emphasize life force, and they get controversial because it's this push, it's this next opening, it's like this, you know, whole body orgasms, it's polarity, it's masculine, feminine, it's and unbelievably powerful. If you experience some of these polarities, it will it will change your life because it's so meaningful. It's to feel your body filled up with this with aliveness that feels like it's like it's not this way of like healing your trauma where you kind of feel your pain and you be with it and it unfolds bit by bit, but it's painful, and it's like you get into the life force, it's like everything dissolves. It's like, oh my god, I'm like, my body's like a, 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 a hive of like aliveness and freedom. It's like that's a very rich experience. Yeah, I'm almost like you experience yourself as made of light. It's like that's a wonderful experience. And this, yeah, coming back to the human and then the source, I think just really grounds that.
Mm.
Don't lose the human and stay humbly in the source of like the mystery and also our smallness, but also the bigness of experience.
The container is now closed. This conversation with Sean reveals the practice in a fullness, that reaches all the way from where we start with, can we become a little more honest and authentic with ourselves and each other, all the way to union with God. So pretty far reaching. To learn more from Sean, which I think we all could stand a little more learning from Sean Wilkinson, go to circlingeurope.com. Check out their events, their trainings, their workshops. If you live over in Europe, it's pretty much required. Also, they do weekly surrendered leadership online. Thank you again, Sean, for coming onto the container. If you are watching this and you're thinking, wow, what an episode, that was really something, luckily, there's a way you can support the work that we do and ensure that there will be more episodes like this in the future. That's by going to patreon.com/thecontainer, making a small monthly contribution. Patrons get special video content like The Way That Can Be Told, where we circle through the Tao Te Ching, as well as other odds and ends. We started a newsletter, which you can find on our website, thecontainerpod.com. But guess what? Patrons getting that newsletter a little bit early. But we all know there's far and away one best reason to donate, and that is the warmth you feel inside. With that, we have a really nice way of closing. Keep it. Namaste.